Next on Newsmax Prime, legend has it that Nero fiddled while Rome burned. But we have video of Obama doing the tango in the wake of terror. Our president in Argentina busted a move following the Brussels bombings. From that tango to a tie. Ted Cruz and Donald Trump in a statistical dead heat, according to new polls. Ruddy, Richard Viguerie, and David Bossie offer their perspectives on the presidential race. Plus, the catcher in the rye. Spell that last word, W-R-Y. We remember Joe Garagiola, what he meant to baseball and to broadcasting, as Newsmax Prime starts right now. Good evening and welcome to Newsmax Prime. I'm J.D. Hayworth. Of prime interest tonight, poll positioning. In the latest national survey from Fox News, Donald Trump leads in the race for the Republican nomination with 41%. Ted Cruz right behind him at 38%, but that's well within the poll's margin of error of 5 percentage points. And that makes it a statistical tie. Ohio Governor John Kasich trails at 17%. It's a similar story in Wisconsin, courtesy of a new survey from Emerson College. But that poll shows Ted Cruz on top at 36%, Trump in second place at 35%, obviously within that margin of error as well. John Kasich, again, a distant third at 19%. But the news for Governor Kasich is much better when looking at hypothetical November matchups against Hillary Clinton in the general election. Take a look. Kasich beats Hillary 51% to 40%, according to that survey. And also from Fox News, you see Ted Cruz ahead of Hillary Clinton by 3 percentage points, 47 to 44%. But it's Hillary ahead of Donald, 49 to 38%, according to that poll. The surging Texas senator also picked up a major endorsement yesterday from Jeb Bush. Newsmax TV political analyst Dick Morris on the Steve Malzberg show last night described what that means for Ted Cruz.
I think it's significant. I think that it shows that it graphically illustrates that Cruz is the only alternative to Trump. And when you get guys like Lindsey Graham and Romney and Bush, who really hate Trump, endorsing Cruz, who they also don't like, it's clear that that's what they're saying. And they're really saying that John Kasich is just in this for an ego trip.
For more on this story, we're pleased to be joined by the Chief Executive Officer of Newsmax Media, Christopher Ruddy. Chris joins us tonight from our Newsmax corporate headquarters. Skyping in from Washington, D.C., the president of Citizens United and the Citizens United Foundation, David Bossie. Also with us, the chairman of ConservativeHQ.com, Richard Viguerie, Skyping in tonight from Virginia. Thanks to all of you for appearing here tonight on Newsmax Prime. Chris, you heard the poll results. Are you surprised? And is this a case of the establishment selecting the lesser of two evils in their collective mindset by leaning towards Senator Cruz over Donald Trump?
Well, JD, there's always a saying, there's long been a saying that the perfect is the enemy of the good. We're never going to get a perfect candidate. So there's always going to be candidates with strengths and weaknesses and more evil and less evil. The point is, I think we have actually 3 good candidates at this point. I would be happy with any of those 3 getting the nomination because I want to defeat Hillary Clinton. I do think that it's pretty clear there's only 2 that can win right now, and that's Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. And I also think that if there's any chance the Republicans have of defeating Hillary in November, they have to come out of this convention a united party, a united front. They're not going to do that by a brokered convention. Dick Morris is right. If John Kasich thinks he's going to win this by going into a brokered convention, he is on a big ego trip.
And so you pinned a column for our parent website, Newsmax.com, saying it's time for Kasich to quit the campaign.
Well, and I think that Jeb Bush's endorsement, where very clearly he probably would not have preferred Ted Cruz, that he is basically signaling to the donors in the establishment class that, hey, we can't have a situation where we have a brokered convention, and that John Kasich is simply not going to win it. And I think, Ted Cruz, I agree with Rush Limbaugh. Ted Cruz is the closest candidate that we have right now to Ronald Reagan in the race.
Let me turn to Dave Bossie, because you know what happens when suddenly guys like Lindsey Graham and the establishment weigh in behind Ted Cruz. There's almost a backlash going, now wait a minute, not so fast. You know what I'm talking about, David. Take us through that. Is that backlash reflexive, or is it reflective? Are people thinking this through going, I'm not so sure about this?
Well, first of all, to conservatives who support Ted Cruz, like Chris just said a moment ago, from a public policy standpoint, there's a good argument that Ted Cruz is the best conservative of the three and really of the 17 original candidates that there were at the beginning of this. So Ted Cruz is well on his way to being the national conservative leader. It's whether he becomes the nominee or not. When Lindsey Graham, who 3 weeks ago said that Ted Cruz could be murdered on the Senate floor and nobody would convict you, and now is endorsing you, and Jeb Bush, who fought fiercely against him, is now endorsing him, Mitt Romney, the establishment is coming to the to support Ted Cruz for their own nefarious reasons. Ted Cruz isn't asking for their support, but he's getting it. And Ted Cruz will take it because he's looking at the alternative, and that is Donald Trump. John Kasich, I got to tell you, I know you just quoted the poll of he can beat Hillary Clinton in November, but that's ridiculous. That's the same as saying Ronald Reagan would in a hypothetical matchup, because it's never going to happen. Reagan nor Kasich will be facing Clinton in November. So I think that the open convention is the danger to conservatives. It really is.
Richard Viguerie, we note for the record that you got behind Ted Cruz fairly early in this. Now, are you going to tell us politics is the art of addition and conservatives should not be alarmed with this embrace of the establishment of Senator Cruz?
Well, I think what you're seeing, Chris, is the establishment coming our way. They're coming towards the conservative. Ted Cruz is not moving towards them. They're moving towards the conservative candidate in the race. And what we're seeing in front of our eyes is a transformation of the Republican Party, partly led by Trump, but all heavily led by Ted Cruz. So right in front of us, the Republican Party is changing, and it's probably not ever going to go back to being an establishment party. In the next year or so, you will see it much more conservative than you are now. I endorse what Chris said, by the way, about the number one thing the Republican Party must have to win in November is a united party, and only Ted Cruz can unite the party. Kasich certainly cannot unite the party, and Donald Trump cannot either. And so I think that we have to unite behind Ted Cruz if you want to win. That's so important.
I might add, JD, I might say that I totally agree with Richard on a number of points. I am not endorsing any candidate, but I do think that Ted Cruz unites the party more than Kasich certainly doesn't, and that Ted actually brings in the Trump voters as well. So he is the guy that can unite. I also think Donald Trump would be a very strong candidate, even though he is not doing well in the national polls against Hillary. And I echo what David said, that these polls right now are ridiculous as to who would beat Hillary. I remember just 2 months ago they were citing all these polls that said Marco Rubio would be the candidate that could beat Hillary.
To the subject of Donald Trump, again, our parent website, Newsmax.com, had a front page article when you went to the site saying that the GOP is concerned about younger voters failing to embrace Donald Trump. Now, Dave Bossie, can Trump amend I should say, that demographic rift? Or since young folks don't come out to vote in major numbers anyway, is it a problem?
Yeah, that's interesting. I cut my teeth in youth politics. I learned at the knee of Richard Viguerie and Morton Blackwell and worked on national youth campaigns for president. For different presidential candidates. And I can tell you, it's always been a struggle to turn them out to vote because, quite frankly, they don't get out of bed. They don't want to turn out to vote. They don't turn out to vote in large numbers. And so I don't know that Donald Trump has to put an enormous effort into this. But I got to tell you, young people today that I see that are paying attention understand that our American sovereignty is in danger. They understand our economy is in danger. And they understand that they aren't going to have the futures that their parents had when they were growing up, or that they want for their children today. And that's what they're focused on. So I think they're going to be looking in November for who can give them the best opportunity for the American dream. And I got to tell you, it's both Donald Trump and Ted Cruz as opposed to Hillary Clinton. That's for certain.
I think there's a lot of strengths from a number of the candidates. I think that Donald Trump would bring in a lot of new voters, blue-collar workers, union workers that normally wouldn't vote. He turns off, and he will turn off, a lot of immigrant voters, ethnic voters, Latino voters. He himself said that Romney was crazy for supporting self-deportation, and I think those words are going to come back and haunt him on that. Where Ted Cruz, now this is interesting, people forget, he's half Cuban American. He will appeal. I think he's got one of the best shots to win the state of Florida between the Cuban votes there and the Puerto Rican voters that have been trending Republican in Orlando area. So I think there's a lot of dynamics at work here that could be quite surprising.
Let me turn to Richard Viguerie. And Richard, I say this with all due respect, you have seen a lot of campaigns in your day. In the minute that remains, do you agree with Brother Ruddy? Does Cruz have the ability, as a doctrinaire conservative, but as an American of Cuban descent, to bring together all these different coalitions?
Absolutely. The campaign hasn't started yet. Just to add something to what we've said earlier, Chris, I, and David talked about the number one thing you must have to win in November is to be united. The second most important thing after you have a united party, you must have a candidate who's a fighter. And John Kasich is anything but a fighter. And you can't go against Hillary and expect to win if you're not a fighter. So Ted Cruz is going to take that fight to Hillary.
JD, I think for full disclosure, you have to say that Richard Viguerie was supporting Ted Cruz even before Ted Cruz was born. I jokingly say that, but Richard really was the father of the modern conservative movement. And in many ways, David Bossie's been the godfather with his Citizens United case, which finally allowed conservatives to level the playing field by going out and raising money in these PACs, which allows the conservatives to fight against the union. So it's been an honor, I have to say, to be on the program with both of those heavyweights.
And indeed, it's an honor to have all three of you. And we should note for the record, there's a considerable clamor for Donald Trump out there. I know I'm going to hear about that in viewer comments. Gentlemen, our thanks to you. And speaking of comments, we want to hear what's on your mind. Couple of ways to get in touch with me. Newsmaxtv.com/comments. Or why don't you use Twitter? And our handle is @Newsmax Prime. Up next, Pete Hoekstra and Scott Neal with the latest on the Brussels bombings. Stay with us.